The warm, golden light of the setting sun painted the dusty main street of Porterville, Arizona. As Clara Blackburn scrubbed the rough wooden floor of the Silver Dollar Saloon, her knees raw and aching from hours of labor. The year was 1876, and like many days before, Clara's back burned with exhaustion as she moved her brush in rhythmic circles, trying to remove the day's worth of mud, tobacco juice, and spilled whiskey. "You missed a spot," growled Silas McCready, the saloon owner, pointing to a dark stain near the bar with his boot. His portly frame cast a long shadow across her work, and Clara bit her lip to keep from saying something that would cost her the meager wage she desperately needed. "Yes, Mr. McCready," she replied, her voice soft but not broken. At 22 years of age, Clara had learned that survival meant keeping her head down and her opinions to herself. She dipped her brush back into the bucket of soapy water and attacked the stubborn stain with renewed vigor, pushing aside a strand of copper hair that had escaped from beneath her faded kerchief. The saloon had emptied after the afternoon rush, with only a few regular patrons nursing their drinks in the far corners. Through the windows, Clara could see the silhouettes of horses tied up outside and the occasional passerby hurrying to finish their business before nightfall. Porterville wasn't a large town, but it was growing steadily as the railroads pushed farther west, bringing with them new opportunities and desperate souls alike. Clara hadn't always been on her knees scrubbing floors. Once, she had been the cherished daughter of a prosperous rancher outside of Santa Fe, but typhoid fever had claimed both her parents 3 years ago, and her father's business partner had swindled her out of her inheritance. With nowhere else to go and no family to turn to, she had traveled west, eventually finding herself in Porterville with nothing but the clothes on her back and a locket containing a faded photograph of her parents. "When you're done with that floor, the spittoons need emptying," McCready called over his shoulder as he retreated to his office. "And don't forget to clean the windows before you leave." Clara nodded silently, knowing that arguing would only lead to dismissal. The job at the Silver Dollar was far from ideal, but it provided her with enough money for a small room above the general store and one meal a day. It was more than some had in these harsh frontier lands. The batwing doors of the saloon suddenly swung open and a tall figure stepped through, momentarily blocking the dying sunlight. Clara kept her head down, focusing on her work, but she couldn't help noticing the silence that fell across the room as the stranger entered. His spurs jingled softly with each step as he approached the bar. From her position on the floor, Clara could see his worn leather boots, caked with the dust of long travels. They stopped just short of the wet patch she had been scrubbing, careful not to disturb her work. "Whiskey," the stranger said, his voice deep and rough like gravel. "The good stuff if you have it." The bartender, a thin man named Elijah, nodded and reached for a bottle on the top shelf. "You passing through, mister?" he asked, making casual conversation as he poured the amber liquid. "Maybe," the stranger replied. "Depends on what I find here." Clara continued her scrubbing, moving cautiously around the stranger's boots. As she inched closer to the bar, her brush accidentally struck his boot, splashing a few drops of dirty water onto the leather. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, immediately reaching for her rag to wipe away the water. The stranger turned, and for the first time, Clara looked up at him. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jawline shadowed by several days' worth of beard. His eyes were a startling blue, the color of a clear mountain lake, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No harm done," he said softly, his expression softening as he took in her kneeling position and worn, calloused hands. The moment was broken by McCready's reappearance. "Girl, stop bothering the customers and get back to work," he barked, moving toward them with surprising speed for a man of his size. Clara quickly lowered her gaze and resumed her scrubbing, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The stranger watched her for a moment longer before turning back to his drink, but not before Clara caught a flash of something in his eyes, anger, perhaps, but not directed at her. As the evening progressed, more patrons filed into the saloon. The piano player arrived and began pounding out lively tunes, while the dance hall girls descended from upstairs. their colorful dresses and painted faces drawing the attention of the mostly male clientele. Clara continued her work, moving from the floors to the spittoons and then to the grimy windows, all while trying to remain as invisible as possible. The stranger stayed at the bar, nursing his drink and observing the room with watchful eyes. Occasionally, Clara would feel his gaze on her, but whenever she glanced in his direction, he would be looking elsewhere. There was something different about him compared to the other cowboys and drifters who passed through Porterville. He carried himself with quiet confidence, and despite his trail-worn appearance, there was an air of dignity about him that made others give him a wide berth. As Clara was finishing the windows, Macready approached her again. "One of the girls is sick tonight," he said, his breath reeking of cheap cigars and whiskey. "You'll have to serve drinks. Try not to spill anything or it'll come out of your pay." Clara's stomach tightened with dread. Serving drinks meant navigating through crowds of drunken men, many of whom took any opportunity to grab at the serving girls. But refusing wasn't an option. She nodded and followed Macready to the bar, where she was given a stained apron and hurried instructions from Elijah on which bottles contained what. For the next hour, Clara moved through the crowded saloon, delivering drinks and doing her best to avoid wandering hands and lewd comments. Her feet ached, and her arms grew tired from carrying heavy trays, but she pressed on, knowing that each drink served meant a few more cents in her pocket at the end of the night. It was nearing midnight when trouble arrived in the form of 3 cowboys who burst through the doors, already drunk and looking for more entertainment. They were trail hands from one of the large cattle operations north of town, flush with cash after a successful drive to the railhead. "Well, looky here," one of them drawled as Clara approached their table with drinks. "Macready's got himself a new girl and she's a pretty one." Clara set down their whiskeys and tried to retreat, but the cowboy grabbed her wrist, pulling her roughly toward him. "How about a little company, darlin'? I've got money to spend. Please let go," Clara said firmly, trying to pull away without causing a scene. "I just served the drinks." The cowboy tightened his grip. "Playing hard to get, are you? I like that in a woman. The lady asked you to let go." The voice came from behind Clara, calm but with an edge of steel. The stranger from earlier stood there, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. The cowboy looked up, his face flushing with anger at the interruption. "This ain't your business, mister," he spat. "Find your own girl." "She's not yours either," the stranger replied. "And I won't ask again." The saloon had grown quiet, the piano player's fingers hovering above the keys as everyone watched the confrontation unfold. Macready emerged from his office, his face darkening at the prospect of trouble in his establishment. The cowboy released Clara's wrist and stood up, swaying slightly from the alcohol. His 2 companions also rose, flanking him. 3 against 1, the cowboy sneered. "You sure you want to push this?" The stranger didn't blink. "I'm sure." What happened next occurred so quickly that Clara barely registered it. The cowboy lunged forward with a wild punch, but the stranger sidestepped it effortlessly. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the cowboy's extended arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him face first onto the table, scattering glasses and cards. One of the other cowboys reached for his gun, but the stranger was faster, drawing his own weapon and cocking it in one smooth movement. "I wouldn't," he advised quietly. The 3rd cowboy raised his hands in surrender. "Easy now, we don't want no real trouble." The stranger nodded toward the door. "Then take your friend and go sleep it off." The 2 standing cowboys exchanged glances, then helped their groaning companion to his feet. They retreated through the batwing doors, muttering threats but not daring to look back. The stranger holstered his gun and turned to Clara. "Are you all right, miss?" Before she could answer, Macready pushed his way between them. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, jabbing a finger at the stranger's chest. "Those are paying customers. They were manhandling your employee," the stranger replied calmly. Macready snorted. "She knows what working in a saloon means, and who's going to pay for those broken glasses?" He turned to Clara. "That's coming out of your wages, girl. Now get back to work." The stranger's eyes narrowed dangerously. "How much does she make, scrubbing your floors and serving your drinks?" "That's none of your damn business," Macready blustered. "I'm making it my business." The stranger reached into his vest and pulled out a handful of gold coins, dropping them onto the bar with a heavy clink. Consider this compensation for the glasses and her wages for the month. Macready's eyes widened at the sight of the gold. Now see here. And one more thing, the stranger continued, his voice low but carrying throughout the now silent saloon. He turned to Clara, those piercing blue eyes meeting hers directly. You'll never kneel for anyone again. Not while I have anything to say about it. Clara stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. Who was this man? Why would he spend so much money on her behalf, and what did he want in return? In her experience, no one did anything for nothing, especially not in places like Porterville. I don't need charity, she said quietly, her pride flaring despite her circumstances. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. It's not charity, miss, it's justice. No one should have to kneel and scrub floors for men who don't respect them. He turned back to Macready. The lady is leaving with me, unless you have any objections. Macready looked from the gold coins to the stranger's hand, which rested casually near his holstered gun, and then to Clara. Take her, he muttered finally. Plenty more like her looking for work. The stranger extended his hand to Clara. What do you say? It's your choice. Clara hesitated. This could be a terrible mistake. She knew nothing about this man except that he had a quick draw and apparently enough money to throw around casually. But something in his eyes spoke of honesty, and the alternative was to continue scrubbing floors for a man who saw her as little more than a piece of property. She untied her stained apron and let it fall to the floor. I'll need to collect my things, she said. The stranger nodded. I'll wait for you outside. As Clara hurried to gather her meager possessions from the small room she rented above the general store, her mind raced with questions and doubts. Was she trading one form of servitude for another? But there had been something in the stranger's voice when he said she would never kneel again, a promise, not a threat. She packed her few clothes, a hairbrush, and her parents' locket into a small bag. The landlady watched with suspicious eyes but said nothing as Clara handed over the key and walked out into the night. The stranger was waiting by the hitching post, holding the reins of a magnificent chestnut stallion. Up close, in the light of the full moon, Clara could see him more clearly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the scar that ran from his right temple to his jaw. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, a dark shirt, leather vest, and denim pants tucked into well-made boots. I realized I don't know your name, Clara said, stopping a few feet away from him. Beau Sutton, he replied, tipping his hat slightly. And you are Clara Blackburn. Well, Miss Blackburn, I hope you don't think I'm being too forward, but I've arranged a room for you at the hotel down the street. It's paid up for a week, which should give you time to decide what you want to do next. Clara blinked in surprise. You're not. That is, I thought. Beau's expression softened with understanding. You thought I was buying your services? No, madam, that's not why I stepped in. I just couldn't stand seeing you treated that way. Relief flooded through Clara, followed quickly by confusion. Then why help me? You don't know me. Beau was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to share. Let's just say I know what it's like to be at someone else's mercy, he finally said, and I've made it a point to help others when I can. He offered her his arm. May I escort you to the hotel? Clara hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. His solid presence beside her felt reassuring as they walked down Porterville's Main Street, past darkened storefronts and the occasional lamplight from upstairs windows. The hotel was small but clean, a significant step up from her previous accommodation. The night clerk barely glanced up from his newspaper as Beau collected the key to the room he had arranged. Second floor, end of the hall, the clerk mumbled, returning to his reading. At the foot of the stairs, Beau handed Clara the key. Get some rest. If you're willing, I'd like to talk more tomorrow, perhaps over breakfast. Clara studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motives, but found only sincerity. Yes, she said finally. I'd like that, and… Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Beau, he corrected gently. Good night, Clara. As Clara climbed the stairs to her room, she felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief at escaping the silver dollar, wariness at her sudden change in fortune, and a fluttering in her stomach whenever she thought of Beau Sutton's intense blue eyes. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. The hotel room was simple but luxurious compared to what Clara was accustomed to: a real bed with clean sheets, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and even a small window overlooking the street. She washed the day's grime from her face and hands, changed into her nightgown, and sat on the edge of the bed, still trying to process everything that had happened. Who was Beau Sutton? A drifter with a conscience, a wealthy man slumming it in frontier towns. And what would he expect from her in return for his kindness? Clara had learned the hard way that nothing in life came free. Yet there had been something in his manner, a respectful distance that suggested his motives might truly be as honorable as he claimed. Clara fingered the locket around her neck, wondering what her parents would advise if they were still alive. Her father had always told her to trust her instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling her that Beau Sutton might be exactly what he appeared to be: a good man. With that comforting thought, Clara slipped under the covers and fell into the deepest sleep she had experienced in years. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, waking Clara from her slumber. For a moment she was disoriented, unaccustomed to the comfort of a real mattress and the quiet of a private room. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, wondering if it had all been a dream. But the hotel room was real, as was the clean dress she had laid out the night before, one of only two she owned that wasn't patched or faded beyond repair. Clara washed and dressed with care, taking extra time to brush her long auburn hair until it shone. She fastened it in a simple bun at the nape of her neck, mindful of appearing respectable but not vain. A soft knock at her door made her heart leap into her throat. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, Clara opened the door to find Beau Sutton standing in the hallway. In the clear light of day, he looked even more impressive, tall and solid, with those striking blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He had shaved and changed into a clean shirt, though he still wore the same worn leather vest. "Good morning," he said, his voice a deep rumble that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "I hope you slept well, better than I have in a long time," Clara admitted. "Thank you again for your kindness." Beau shook his head slightly. "No need for thanks. Are you ready for breakfast?" "There's a decent cafe across the street that makes passable coffee." Clara nodded and followed him down the stairs and out into the morning sunshine. Porterville was already bustling with activity: shopkeepers opening their doors, freight wagons rolling down the street, and cowboys leading fresh horses from the livery stable. Several people nodded to Beau as they passed, suggesting he was not a complete stranger to the town. Clara noticed a few curious glances thrown her way as well. News traveled fast in small communities, and she had no doubt that her dramatic exit from the Silver Dollar was already the subject of gossip. The cafe was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the appetizing smell of fresh bread and bacon in the air. Beau selected a table near the window and held Clara's chair for her, a courtesy she couldn't remember receiving since her father was alive. After they ordered coffee and a full breakfast for both, at Beau's insistence, an awkward silence fell between them. Clara fidgeted with her napkin, unsure how to begin or what to say to this man who had upended her life so completely in the span of one evening. "You're wondering why I helped you," Beau said at last, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "And what I expect in return." Clara met his gaze directly. "Yes." Beau took a sip of the coffee that had just been placed before them. "My mother was a lot like you," he said, his voice softening with the memory. "Strong, proud, determined to make her way in a world that didn't make it easy for women alone. After my father died, she took whatever work she could find to keep us fed and housed, including scrubbing floors in places much like the Silver Dollar." He paused, his eyes taking on a distant look. "I was just a boy, but I remember how she would come home with her hands raw and bleeding, her back so stiff she could barely bend to kiss me goodnight. And I swore then that when I grew up, I would never let another woman suffer that way if I could help it." "That's a noble sentiment," Clara said carefully, "but surely you can't save every woman in every saloon across the West." A small smile played at the corners of Beau's mouth. "No, I can't." But I can help the ones I encounter, which brings me to what I expect from you. Clara tensed, waiting for the other boot to drop. Nothing, Beau said simply. I expect nothing. The room is yours for a week, no strings attached. What you do after that is entirely your decision. Clara studied him, looking for any sign of deception. Why Porterville? She asked. What brings you here? Business, Beau replied. I'm looking to buy land. There's a small ranch for sale north of town that caught my interest. You're a rancher, among other things. I've done a bit of everything over the years, cowboying, freight hauling, even some prospecting. But cattle raising is what I know best. My family had a spread in Texas before the war. Their food arrived, momentarily halting the conversation. Clara realized she was ravenous and began to eat with enthusiasm, though she tried to maintain proper manners. Beau seemed to have a healthy appetite as well, and for a few minutes they focused on their meal. What about you? Beau asked eventually. How did you end up scrubbing floors at the Silver Dollar? Clara hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing her story. As they ate, she told him about her parents, the ranch near Santa Fe, and how she had lost everything to her father's duplicitous business partner. She explained her journey west and the series of increasingly desperate circumstances that had led her to Porterville and the Silver Dollar. I had nowhere else to go, she concluded, and no skills that would earn me a living, except for the domestic tasks I had learned growing up. Beau listened intently, his expression darkening when she described how her inheritance had been stolen. This business partner, he said. What was his name? Thomas Wellen, Clara replied, but it doesn't matter now. He's probably spent every cent of my father's money by now. It matters, Beau said firmly. Theft is theft, whether it's a loaf of bread or a ranch, and thieves should face consequences. There was something in his tone that made Clara wonder if Beau Sutton had more personal experience with injustice than he was letting on. But before she could ask, he changed the subject. What would you like to do now? He asked. If you had your choice, I mean. Clara considered the question carefully. It had been so long since anyone had asked her what she wanted that the concept seemed almost foreign. I'd like to have my own place, she said finally. Something small but mine, maybe a little house where I could take in sewing or laundry, honest work that didn't involve. She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the degradation she had felt on her knees at the Silver Dollar. Beau nodded understanding. That's a reasonable ambition. Have you saved anything toward it? A little, Clara admitted. Not enough for a house, but perhaps enough to rent a room with some privacy where I could set up a sewing machine if I had one. And do you have such a machine? Clara shook her head. No, but I'm a skilled seamstress. My mother taught me well. Beau seemed to be considering something as he finished his coffee. There might be an opportunity, he said slowly. If I do purchase this ranch, I'll need someone to manage the household. The previous owner was a widower, and from what I've seen, the place could use a woman's touch. Clara stiffened slightly. Mr. Sutton, it would be a respectable position, Beau added quickly, seeing her reaction. Your own quarters, fair wages, and the chance to save toward your own place. No, expectations beyond your household duties. Clara relaxed a fraction but remained wary. Why would you offer such a position to a woman you just met? There must be plenty of respectable widows or spinsters in town who would jump at the chance. Beau's gaze was steady and direct. Because I've seen something in you that I admire, Clara Blackburn. Strength. Dignity, even when kneeling on that saloon floor, and because I believe in giving people a fair chance, which you haven't had in a long time. His words touched something deep within Clara, a place that had been closed off since her parents' deaths. The idea of leaving Porterville, of starting fresh where no one knew her as that saloon girl, was tempting, and yet, I don't even know if you'll buy this ranch, she pointed out. And I have nothing to fall back on if you change your mind. Fair point, Beau acknowledged. How about this? I'm riding out to look at the property again today. Come with me, see the place for yourself. If I do make an offer and it's accepted, and if you decide the position interests you, we can discuss terms. If not, you still have the hotel room for a week, and I'll help you find other employment in town, something that doesn't involve scrubbing floors. It was a generous offer, and Clara found herself wanting to accept, but caution still held her back. People will talk, she said. A single woman riding out alone with a man she barely knows. Beau considered this, then nodded. We'll ask Mrs. Reynolds, the hotel owner's wife, to accompany us. She's a respectable woman, and her presence will satisfy propriety. The solution was so simple and thoughtful that Clara felt a bloom of warmth in her chest. This man continued to surprise her with his consideration and respect. All right, she agreed. I'll come see this ranch of yours, Mr. Sutton. Beau, he reminded her gently, if we're to be potential employer and employee, we should at least be on a first-name basis. Beau, Clara repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It suited him. She decided, straightforward and strong, like the man himself. After breakfast, Beau went to arrange for horses and to speak with Mrs. Reynolds, leaving Clara to return to her room and prepare for the outing. She changed into her sturdier dress and sturdy boots, thankful that she had managed to keep them in reasonable condition despite her circumstances. When she came back downstairs, she found Beau waiting with Mrs. Reynolds, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. Miss Blackburn, such a pleasure, Mrs. Reynolds greeted her warmly. Mr. Sutton has told me about the position he's considering for you. How exciting! I haven't been out to the old Taylor place in years. It will be lovely to see it again. Clara shot Beau a grateful look for his discretion. He hadn't mentioned finding her at the Silver Dollar or the circumstances of their meeting, preserving her dignity. They set off shortly after, with Clara riding a gentle mare that Beau had rented from the livery. Mrs. Reynolds rode in a small buggy, explaining that her arthritis made horseback riding too uncomfortable these days. Beau rode alongside Clara on his chestnut stallion, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing tidbits about the area. The day was perfect for riding clear skies, a gentle breeze, and the June sun warm but not oppressive. As they left the dusty confines of Porterville behind, Clara felt herself relaxing, enjoying the sensation of freedom that came with being on horseback in the open country. It had been years since she had ridden, but the skill returned naturally, muscle memory taking over. You ride well, Beau observed, watching her adjust easily to the mare's gait. My father taught me when I was very young, Clara replied. We used to ride every morning before breakfast, checking the fences and cattle. The memory brought a pang of sadness, but also a fondness that time had softened. You miss it, Beau said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Clara admitted. All of it, the land, the animals, the work. It was hard sometimes, but it was honest, and it was home. Something flickered in Beau's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or shared experience. That's what I'm looking for too, he said quietly. A place that can become home. They rode in companionable silence after that with Mrs. Reynolds occasionally calling out observations from her buggy or sharing gossip about the families whose properties they passed. Clara found herself enjoying the older woman's company and Beau's quiet presence beside her. After about an hour's ride, they crested a gentle rise and Beau reined in his horse. There it is, he said, gesturing to the valley below. The Taylor Ranch. Clara followed his gaze and caught her breath. The property stretched out before them, a modest but well-built ranch house nestled against a backdrop of cottonwoods, a large barn, several outbuildings, and acres of good grazing land bordered by a creek that glinted silver in the sunlight. It's beautiful, she said softly. Beau nodded. Mr. Taylor was getting on in years and couldn't manage it alone after his son moved to California. The land's good, water rights are secure, and there's enough acreage to run a decent-sized herd. It's smaller than what I'm used to, but it could be home, Clara finished for him. Understanding instinctively what he was looking for, their eyes met, and something passed between them, a shared recognition, a connection that went beyond their brief acquaintance. Clara looked away first, unsettled by the sudden intimacy of the moment. They continued down to the ranch, where they were met by Mr. Harper, the bank manager who was handling the sale of the property. He seemed pleased to see Beau again and greeted Mrs. Reynolds warmly as an old friend. To Clara, he was politely curious, clearly wondering about her presence but too well-mannered to ask directly. Miss Blackburn is considering the position of housekeeper. Should I purchase the property? Beau explained smoothly, putting the banker at ease. Mr. Harper nodded approvingly. A fine idea, Mr. Sutton. The place hasn't had a woman's touch since Mrs. Taylor passed 5 years ago, and it shows, I'm afraid. He wasn't exaggerating. As they toured the ranch house, Clara could see that, while structurally sound, the interior had suffered from years of bachelor living. Dust lay thick on surfaces, curtains hung limply from broken rods, and the kitchen showed signs of minimal use and less cleaning. Yet beneath the neglect, Clara could see the bones of a lovely home. Large windows let in ample light, the rooms were well proportioned, and there was even a small parlor with a fireplace for winter evenings. She found herself mentally cataloging what needed to be done: curtains washed, floors scrubbed properly, furniture polished, and fresh linens throughout. "What do you think?" Beau asked quietly as they stood in the kitchen, while Mr. Harper showed Mrs. Reynolds some feature of the parlor. "It needs work," Clara said honestly, "but it has good potential. The stove appears in working order, the pump brings clear water, and there's ample storage. With some cleaning and organizing, it could be quite comfortable." Beau smiled, clearly pleased with her practical assessment. "And the position, does it interest you?" Clara hesitated, weighing her options carefully. The job would give her security, respectability, and the chance to save money toward her own future. And there was something about Beau Sutton that inspired trust, despite her natural caution. "Yes," she said finally. "If you purchase the property and still wish to hire me, I would accept the position." Beau's smile widened, transforming his serious face and making him look suddenly younger. "Good, I'll speak with Harper about making an offer today." The rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant blur as they toured the remainder of the property. The barn was in better condition than the house, well built and practical. There was a small vegetable garden, long neglected but easily revived with some care. A chicken coop stood empty but ready for new occupants. By the time they prepared to return to town, Clara found herself genuinely excited about the prospect of working at the ranch. It would be hard work, certainly, but honest and dignified, worlds away from scrubbing floors at the Silver Dollar while dodging unwanted advances. On the ride back, Mrs. Reynolds kept up a steady stream of conversation, offering Clara advice about suppliers in town and which women might be willing to help with the initial cleaning of the ranch house. "The widow Jensen does beautiful needlework if you need new curtains," she suggested. "And young Sally Parker at the general store always sets aside the best produce for people she likes." Clara listened gratefully, appreciating both the practical advice and the older woman's implicit acceptance of her. By including her in these feminine concerns of homemaking, Mrs. Reynolds was essentially welcoming her into the circle of respectable women in the community, a circle that had been closed to her as long as she worked at the saloon. When they reached Porterville, the sun was beginning to set. Beau helped both women down from their mounts and thanked Mrs. Reynolds warmly for her company. "It was my pleasure entirely," the older woman assured him before turning to Clara. "My dear, you must come to tea tomorrow. I have some patterns for household linens that might interest you, and I'd love to hear more about your skills as a seamstress." After Mrs. Reynolds had departed in her buggy, Beau walked Clara back to the hotel. They paused at the entrance, both suddenly awkward in the fading light. "Thank you for today," Clara said. It's been a long time since I felt hopeful about the future." Beau's expression softened. "Harper believes the sale could be completed within a week if old man Taylor accepts my offer. I'll let you know as soon as I hear anything." Clara nodded. "In the meantime, I should look for temporary work. I can't continue to accept your charity even for a few days." "It's not charity," Beau insisted. "Consider it an advance on your wages if that makes you feel better, but please don't go back to the Silver Dollar or anywhere like it." "I won't," Clara promised. "Mrs. Reynolds mentioned that the dressmaker might need help. I'll speak with her tomorrow." Beau looked relieved. "Good. I'll call on you tomorrow evening if I may. Perhaps we could have dinner and discuss the details of your position, wages, duties, that sort of thing." "That would be appropriate," Clara agreed, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the prospect of dining with him again. With a tip of his hat, Beau bid her good night and strode away down the street. Clara watched him go, still marveling at how dramatically her life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been on her knees scrubbing a saloon floor. Today, she was contemplating a respectable position as a housekeeper on a beautiful ranch, with the possibility of saving for her own future. And all because a cowboy with kind eyes and a sense of justice had decided she shouldn't have to kneel for anyone ever again. The following day brought more changes to Clara's life. Her visit to Mrs. Reynolds proved enlightening and pleasant. The older woman not only shared patterns and household tips, but also introduced Clara to several other respectable women from town who had been invited to tea. There were curious glances and a few whispered comments, but Mrs. Reynolds skillfully smoothed over any awkwardness by emphasizing Clara's skills as a seamstress, and her new position as housekeeper at the Taylor Ranch speaking of it as a settled matter, though Beau's offer had not yet been accepted. "Mr. Sutton is most fortunate to have found someone with such refined abilities," Mrs. Reynolds declared, showing the other ladies the delicate embroidery Clara had brought to demonstrate her needlework. "I've no doubt the Taylor place will be transformed under Miss Blackburn's capable management." By the time Clara left the tea party, she had received not only acceptance but also offers of assistance and friendship from several of the women. Mrs. Jensen, the widow who specialized in fine needlework, had invited Clara to visit her shop the next day to discuss curtains for the ranch house. Miss Parker from the general store had promised to set aside the best preserving jars when they arrived on the next freight wagon. It was a heady experience for Clara, who had grown accustomed to being invisible or looked down upon during her time at the Silver Dollar. To be treated with respect and included in feminine society again made her realize how much she had missed such connections. Her meeting with the dressmaker, Mrs. Abernathy, was equally successful. Upon examining Clara's neat stitches and hearing of her experience sewing for her mother and herself, the older woman offered her part-time work immediately. "I'm swamped with summer orders, Mrs. Abernathy explained, showing Clara around her small but well-organized shop. "If you could help with the basic assembly and hemming, it would free me for the fittings and more complex work. The pay isn't much, but it's honest work." "That's precisely what I'm looking for," Clara assured her. "And it would only be until Mr. Sutton completes the purchase of the Taylor Ranch if his offer is accepted." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, understanding. "Mrs. Reynolds mentioned your potential position. It's a fine opportunity, my dear." Beau Sutton has made quite an impression since arriving in Porterville last month, quiet but fair, and generous with his custom to local businesses. You could do far worse for an employer. Clara was surprised to learn that Beau had been in town for a month. It explained why so many people seemed to know him, despite his newcomer status. "Has he spoken much about his background?" she asked carefully. The dressmaker shook her head. "Not one for idle chatter, that one, but Sheriff Davis mentioned that he came well recommended from down San Antonio way. Something about helping the law with a gang of cattle rustlers." This new piece of information added another layer to the puzzle that was Beau Sutton. Clara filed it away, increasingly curious about the man who had so dramatically altered her circumstances. She returned to the hotel with a lightness in her step that had been absent for years. For the first time since losing her parents, Clara felt she was regaining solid ground beneath her feet, not just surviving, but moving toward a future that held promise. As she prepared for her dinner with Beau, choosing her better dress and arranging her hair with extra care, Clara reminded herself firmly that their relationship was to be strictly professional. His kindness and her gratitude could easily be misinterpreted by herself as much as by others, and she was determined to maintain appropriate boundaries. Yet when he arrived to escort her to dinner, looking handsome in a clean white shirt and dark vest, Clara couldn't deny the quickening of her pulse or the warmth that spread through her at his appreciative glance. "You look lovely," Beau said simply, offering his arm. "Thank you," Clara replied, placing her hand lightly on his sleeve. "And thank you again for all you've done. My visit to Mrs. Reynolds was most productive, and I've secured temporary work with Mrs. Abernathy until matters are settled regarding the ranch." Beau's face lit up with a genuine smile. That's excellent news, and speaking of the ranch, I have some of my own. Harper received word from Taylor this afternoon. He's accepted my offer. Clara's heart leapt with unexpected joy. That's wonderful. When will the sale be finalized? The paperwork should be completed within the week. I can take possession immediately after, Beau explained as they walked toward the hotel's small dining room. Which means if you're still interested in the position, we should discuss the details. Over a dinner of roast chicken and vegetables, they did exactly that. Beau outlined his expectations for the household management meals, cleaning, laundry, and eventually supervision of any additional help that might be needed as the ranch operations expanded. Clara, in turn, asked practical questions about supplies, budgets, and her specific responsibilities. There's one matter we haven't addressed, Clara said as they finished their meal. My accommodations. Beau nodded, having clearly anticipated this concern. The ranch house has 4 bedrooms. I'll occupy the master bedroom, of course. You would have the bedroom at the far end of the hallway with its own small sitting room attached. It's completely separate from the main living areas and my quarters. Your privacy would be assured. The arrangement sounded perfectly respectable, but Clara knew that appearances mattered as much as reality. And how will this be perceived in town? A single woman living under the same roof as a bachelor employer. It's not uncommon on ranches and farms, Beau pointed out. But to address any potential gossip, I thought perhaps Mrs. Jensen might be willing to live at the ranch temporarily until your position is established and your reputation secure. She mentioned to Mrs. Reynolds that her current lodgings in town are cramped and expensive. Once again, Clara was impressed by Beau's thoughtfulness and foresight. He seemed to have considered every aspect of her comfort and standing. That would be an excellent solution, she agreed. Mrs. Jensen is a lovely woman, and her presence would certainly silence any wagging tongues. As they continued their discussion, Clara found herself increasingly drawn to Beau's intelligence and practical nature. He spoke knowledgeably about cattle raising and land management, but also showed unexpected interest in her ideas for improving the ranch house and making it a true home. The kitchen will need an herb garden, he said at one point. My mother always said no proper kitchen was complete without fresh herbs at hand. You speak of your mother often, Clara observed. You must have been close. A shadow crossed Beau's face. She was everything to me after my father died. Taught me that true strength isn't about muscle or firepower, but about getting up each morning and facing whatever the day brings with dignity. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, Beau agreed softly. She died during a typhoid outbreak when I was 16. But she'd prepared me well, taught me to cook, mend my own clothes, keep accounts. Said no man worth his salt should depend entirely on a woman for the necessities of life. Clara smiled at this practical wisdom. My father taught me to ride, shoot, and mend fences for similar reasons. He said no woman should be helpless just because society expected it. Sounds like we both had parents ahead of their time, Beau commented, his blue eyes warming with shared understanding. As the evening progressed, their conversation drifted from practical matters to more personal topics, books they had enjoyed, places they had seen, experiences that had shaped them. Clara found herself relaxing in Beau's company, drawn to his quiet strength and thoughtful nature. By the time they returned to her hotel room, Clara had made her decision with complete confidence. I accept the position, Mr. Sutton Beau, she said, standing outside her door, and I'm grateful not just for the opportunity but for the respect with which you've offered it. Beau's expression was one of genuine pleasure. Thank you for accepting. I believe this arrangement will benefit us both. He hesitated, then added, when I saw you on your knees in that saloon, something in me couldn't bear it. You deserved better, Clara. Everyone does. The simple sincerity in his voice touched Clara deeply. On impulse, she reached out and briefly squeezed his hand. Good night, Beau, and thank you for seeing me, really seeing me when everyone else just looked past. For a moment they stood there, hands connected, something unspoken passing between them. Then Clara withdrew her hand and slipped into her room, her heart beating a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. The sale of the Taylor Ranch was completed, and Beau took official ownership of the property. Clara divided her time between helping Mrs. Abernathy with sewing orders and preparing for her new position. With Beau's approval, she purchased supplies for the initial cleaning and organization of the ranch house soaps, brushes, beeswax for polishing furniture, fabric for new curtains and bedding. Mrs. Jensen agreed enthusiastically to the arrangement of temporary residence at the ranch, bringing her extensive knowledge of household management and her company for Clara. Word spread quickly through Porterville about Clara's changed circumstances. There were still whispers and suspicious glances from some quarters, particularly from the patrons of the Silver Dollar who had been accustomed to seeing her on her knees with a scrub brush. But the approval of respectable women like Mrs. Reynolds and Mrs. Abernathy went a long way toward rehabilitating her standing in the community. Macready, the saloon owner, watched these developments with a sour expression whenever Clara passed his establishment. Once he called out to her from the doorway, his voice heavy with insinuation. "Playing the lady now, are you? Don't forget where you came from, girl. That cowboy will tire of you soon enough." Clara had lifted her chin and walked on, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response, but his words had stung, touching on her own deep-seated fears. What if this new life was temporary? What if Beau did tire of her company or her services as housekeeper? She confided these worries to Mrs. Jensen as they worked together, sewing curtains for the ranch house parlor. "Nonsense," the older woman said firmly, her needle flashing in the afternoon light. "I've been observing Beau Sutton since he came to town, and he's not the kind of man who acts on whims. If he's offered you this position, it's because he values your skills and respects you as a person." "But he barely knows me," Clara protested. Mrs. Jensen gave her a shrewd look. "Some people can see the true nature of others quickly. It's a rare gift, but valuable. I believe Mr. Sutton has that gift, and he's seen your worth despite the circumstances in which he found you." Her words were comforting, but Clara couldn't entirely dismiss her concerns. She had learned the hard lesson that fortune could turn in an instant, leaving even the most secure person destitute and desperate. Yet as the day approached for her and Mrs. Jensen to move to the ranch, Clara found her excitement outweighing her apprehension. Beau had been nothing but respectful and considerate, consulting her on decisions about the household and providing funds for whatever she deemed necessary for its proper functioning. The morning of the move dawned clear and warm, a perfect late June day. Clara packed her few belongings, said goodbye to the hotel that had been her temporary haven, and met Beau and Mrs. Jensen at the general store, where the wagon was being loaded with their trunks and the supplies they had purchased for the ranch. "Ready for a new chapter?" Beau asked quietly as he helped Clara onto the wagon seat. She nodded, meeting his gaze with growing confidence. "More than ready." The ride to the ranch was filled with pleasant conversation and planning. Mrs. Jensen and Clara discussed meal rotations and laundry schedules, while Beau shared his ideas for expanding the cattle operation and possibly adding sheep in the future. "The creek provides reliable water even in dry years," he explained. "And there's good shelter from winter storms in the northern pastures. With proper management, this land could support twice the current herd." Clara listened with interest, appreciating his knowledge and vision. It reminded her of her father's discussions with the ranch hands back in New Mexico, practical, forward-looking, respectful of the land and its limitations. When they arrived at the ranch, Beau helped them down from the wagon and carried their trunks inside. The house was exactly as Clara remembered it, dusty, neglected, but full of potential. "I'll leave you ladies to settle in," Beau said, heading back to the wagon. "I need to check the fences in the north pasture. The cattle arrive tomorrow, and I want to make sure everything is secure." After he left, Clara and Mrs. Jensen exchanged determined looks, rolled up their sleeves, and set to work. They began with the kitchen, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed, washing cupboards and organizing the supplies they had brought. By midday, they had transformed the heart of the home from a grimy bachelor space to a clean, orderly kitchen ready for meal preparation. They continued their efforts throughout the afternoon, tackling the parlor and dining room with brooms, dust cloths, and polishing wax. Windows were thrown open to let in fresh air, cobwebs were swept away, and floors were scrubbed until the original luster of the wood shone through. Beau returned as the sun was setting to find a transformed house and two tired but satisfied women preparing a simple supper of stew and fresh bread. "This is remarkable," he said, looking around in genuine amazement. "I barely recognize the place." Clara felt a surge of pride at his approval. "We've only just begun. Tomorrow we'll tackle the bedrooms and set up proper linens. And I've plans for curtains and cushion covers that will add color and comfort." They ate their meal at the newly polished dining table, discussing their progress and plans for the coming days. After dinner, Mrs. Jensen retired early, citing her old bones and the day's exertions. Clara stayed to finish cleaning up the kitchen, aware of Beau watching her from the doorway. "You don't have to do everything in a single day," he said gently. "This is your home now, too. There's time." Clara paused, struck by his words, home. It had been so long since she had felt she belonged anywhere. The concept was both appealing and frightening in its permanence. "Old habits," she explained, wiping her hands on a towel. "When you've lived with uncertainty for years, you learn to seize every opportunity while it's there." Beau's expression softened with understanding. "I know that feeling well. After my mother died, I drifted for years, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots, always looking over my shoulder for the next disaster." "What changed?" Clara asked, curious about this glimpse into his past. Beau was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to share. "I realized I was letting fear dictate my life," he said finally. "Always running, always prepared for the worst. It's no way to live. And now you're buying a ranch, putting down those roots." "Trying to," he acknowledged with a slight smile. "It's not easy to break old patterns, but I think it's worth the effort." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and Clara felt that now familiar connection, a recognition of shared experiences and understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Well," she said, breaking the moment before it became too intense, "I should retire as well." "Tomorrow will be another busy day." Beau nodded. "Good night, Clara, and thank you for everything you've done here already." As Clara prepared for bed in her new room, a pleasant space that she and Mrs. Jensen had cleaned thoroughly that afternoon, she found herself reflecting on her changed circumstances. A week ago, she had been scrubbing floors at the Silver Dollar, enduring lewd comments and the constant fear of unwanted advances. Now she was establishing a home in a beautiful ranch house with respectable work and the company of good people. And then there was Beau himself, a puzzle she was slowly piecing together. His kindness and respect were genuine, but she sensed there were depths to him that remained hidden, experiences that had shaped him in ways he wasn't yet ready to share. As she drifted off to sleep, Clara realized that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to tomorrow and all the tomorrows that might follow. The next few weeks established a rhythm of life at the ranch that was both challenging and deeply satisfying for Clara. Each day brought new tasks and small triumphs as the house transformed under her care. New curtains brightened the windows, fresh bedding adorned the beds, and the kitchen became a warm, welcoming space filled with good smells and the clatter of honest work. The cattle arrived as scheduled, a small but healthy herd of Herefords that would form the foundation of Beau's breeding program. With them came two cowhands, brothers named Jake and Tom Miller, who moved into the bunkhouse near the barn. They were experienced, respectful men who had worked for the previous owner and knew the land well. Mrs. Jensen proved to be not only a respectable chaperone, but also a fountain of knowledge about household management. She taught Clara efficient methods for everything from preserving vegetables to removing stubborn stains, skills that had been part of Clara's upbringing but had grown rusty during her years of struggle. Beau was often busy with the cattle and property improvements, leaving early in the morning and returning tired but satisfied in the evenings. He took his meals with Clara and Mrs. Jensen, sharing stories of the day's work and his plans for the ranch's future. Clara found herself looking forward to these evening conversations, enjoying Beau's dry humor and thoughtful observations. He was unlike any man she had known, confident but not arrogant, strong but not domineering, and unfailingly respectful of her opinions and suggestions regarding the household. One evening in late July, about a month after their move to the ranch, Beau returned from town with a large, cloth-wrapped package. He placed it carefully on the kitchen table, where Clara was preparing vegetables for dinner. "I brought something for you," he said, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident manner. "Call it a thank you for all you've done to make this place a home." Clara wiped her hands on her apron and approached the table curiously. At Beau's nod, she unwrapped the cloth to reveal a gleaming new sewing machine, one of the latest models with an iron treadle and polished wooden case. "Beau," she gasped, running her fingers reverently over the smooth surface. "This is too much. It must have cost a small fortune." "You mentioned wanting your own place someday where you could take in sewing," he explained. "I thought this might help you save toward that goal faster, and in the meantime, it will be useful here for household projects." Clara was overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. A sewing machine represented independence, a way to earn her own money beyond her wages as housekeeper. It was not just a generous present but an investment in her future and acknowledgement that her dreams mattered. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, blinking back unexpected tears. "Say you'll accept it," Beau replied softly, "and that you'll stay at least for a while. The ranch is better with you here." The simple sincerity in his voice touched Clara deeply. "I'll stay," she promised. "And thank you not just for this, but for everything since that night at the Silver Dollar." Beau shifted uncomfortably, as he always did when she expressed gratitude for his intervention. "You've more than earned your place here, Clara. Never doubt that." That evening, after Mrs. Jensen had retired, and Beau had gone to check on a pregnant heifer in the barn, Clara sat alone in the parlor with her new sewing machine. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling timbers and the distant lowing of cattle. As she ran her hands over the machine's smooth surfaces, Clara reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. From privileged daughter to destitute scrubwoman to respected housekeeper, each transition had seemed beyond her control, driven by circumstance and the actions of others. But now, with this machine and the skills of her hands, she was regaining a measure of control over her own destiny. Whether she stayed at the Sutton Ranch for years or eventually established her own business, she had options again and the dignity of choice that came with them. And then there was Beau himself, an increasingly important presence in her life. Clara wasn't naive about her growing feelings for him. The admiration and gratitude she had initially felt had deepened into something warmer and more complex. His quiet strength, his consideration, and the rare moments when his serious expression gave way to a genuine smile all affected her in ways that went beyond appropriate feelings for an employer. But Clara was realistic about their situation. Beau had rescued her from difficult circumstances and offered her a respectable position. Any romantic notions on her part could jeopardize the security she had found, and she had no evidence that he saw her as anything more than a capable employee and perhaps a friend. With a sigh, Clara covered the sewing machine and prepared to retire for the night, determined to keep her feelings in proper perspective. The last thing she wanted was to mistake kindness for something more and risk losing everything she had regained. August arrived with scorching heat and occasional violent thunderstorms that rolled across the plains, bringing brief, intense downpours. The ranch thrived despite the challenging weather. The cattle were healthy, the vegetable garden Clara had established was producing abundantly, and the house had become a true home, comfortable and welcoming. One sultry afternoon, as Clara was preserving peaches in the kitchen, a rider appeared in the yard, Sheriff Davis from Porterville. Beau was out checking the herd with Jake and Tom, so Clara wiped her sticky hands and went to greet the lawman. "Good afternoon, Sheriff. Beau, Mr. Sutton is out with the cattle, but I expect him back soon. Would you care to wait in the shade? I can bring you some cold tea." Sheriff Davis removed his hat, revealing graying hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Much obliged, Miss Blackburn. This heat's fit to roast a man alive." Clara settled the sheriff on the front porch with a glass of tea and returned to her preserving, keeping an eye out for Beau's return. When she saw him riding toward the house about 20 minutes later, she went back to the porch to inform the sheriff. "Mr. Sutton's returning now," she said. "Would you like more tea while you wait?" Sheriff Davis shook his head, his expression turning serious. "No thank you, Miss Blackburn. But you might want to stay. This concerns you too, in a way." Clara felt a flutter of anxiety at his ominous tone but took a seat on the porch swing, smoothing her apron nervously. What could the sheriff possibly need to discuss that involved both her and Beau? Beau dismounted near the porch, his expression questioning as he took in the scene. "Sheriff Davis, this is an unexpected visit. Is something wrong in town?" The sheriff stood, replacing his hat against the sun's glare. "Not in our town, no. But I've received a telegram from Santa Fe that might interest you both." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Seems there's been an arrest, a man named Thomas Welland, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and land theft." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Thomas Welland." "My father's partner," Sheriff Davis nodded. "The very same. According to this, he confessed to swindling several people, including the late Henry Blackburn's daughter." He glanced at Beau. "The interesting part is what prompted his confession. Apparently, someone's been asking questions about him, someone who described himself as a friend of the Blackburn family and provided evidence of Welland's crimes to the territorial marshal." Clara's gaze shifted to Beau, who was watching her reaction carefully. "You?" she asked, realization dawning. "You did this?" Beau shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "I made some inquiries after you told me your story. I have contacts in various territories, people who owe me favors. When I learned Welland was still in Santa Fe and still using the same tactics on other vulnerable landowners, I passed the information to the proper authorities." "But why?" Clara pressed, still trying to process this unexpected development. "Why would you go to such trouble for me?" "Because theft is theft," Beau replied simply, echoing the words he had used when she first told him about Welland. "And thieves should face consequences." Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. "There's more. The territorial court has ordered restitution to Welland's victims, including you, Miss Blackburn. It won't be the full value of what was stolen. Welland spent or gambled away much of the money, but it's substantial. The funds will be transferred to our bank here in Porterville within the month." Clara felt lightheaded at the news. Restitution. Money of her own, perhaps not enough to buy back her father's ranch, but enough to give her real options for the future. "Thank you for bringing this news, Sheriff," Beau said, stepping forward to shake the lawman's hand. "It means a great deal to Miss Blackburn." After the sheriff departed, promising to notify them when the funds arrived, Clara and Beau sat together on the porch in stunned silence. The implications of this news were still sinking in for Clara. Financial independence. The ability to make real choices about her future. "Why didn't you tell me what you were doing?" she asked finally, turning to face Beau. He met her gaze steadily. "I didn't want to raise your hopes unnecessarily. There was no guarantee the authorities would act on the information or that Welland would still have any assets to seize. But you tried anyway, for me." Beau shifted uncomfortably. "I believe in justice, Clara. What happened to you wasn't right. I just helped the process along a bit." Clara studied him, seeing beyond his modest explanation to the man, beneath a man who had gone to considerable trouble and expense to right a wrong done to someone who had been a stranger to him just a few months ago. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for this, but for everything since that night at the Silver Dollar. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible." Beau's expression softened, and for a moment Clara thought he might say something more personal. But then Mrs. Jensen called from inside the house, asking about dinner arrangements, and the moment passed. As Clara rose to return to her interrupted preserving, she felt a curious mixture of emotions: gratitude for Beau's intervention, excitement about her changed prospects, and an undeniable pang of uncertainty about what these changes might mean for her place at the ranch and in Beau's life. The restitution money arrived in early September, a sum that took Clara's breath away when Mr. Harper, the bank manager, disclosed the amount. It wasn't the fortune her father had built, but it was enough to purchase a small house in town and establish a modest business with funds left over for security. Clara rode back to the ranch in a daze, her mind whirling with possibilities. For the first time in years, she had real choices before her. She could leave the ranch and establish herself independently in Porterville, perhaps opening the dressmaking shop she had sometimes dreamed of. Or she could invest the money and continue working for Beau, building her savings further. The thought of leaving the ranch, of not seeing Beau daily, not sharing meals and conversations, not being part of the home they had created together, created an unexpected ache in her chest. During the past months, her feelings for him had deepened beyond what was appropriate for an employer-employee relationship. She had tried to keep these feelings contained, to remind herself of her position and the debt of gratitude she owed him. But in quiet moments, when he smiled at something she said or their hands briefly touched as she passed him a plate at dinner, Clara couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her. Did he feel anything similar? There had been moments when she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race, a softness in those blue eyes that went beyond friendly appreciation. But he had never overstepped the boundaries of propriety, never said or done anything that couldn't be interpreted as the consideration of a kind employer for a valued employee. As Clara approached the ranch, she saw Beau by the corral, working with a young horse. He looked up at the sound of her approach, shading his eyes against the September sun. Even from a distance, she could see his questioning expression, his awareness that today was the day she would learn about her restitution. She dismounted near the corral fence, suddenly nervous about sharing her news. What if he assumed she would leave? What if he wanted her to? Well, Beau asked, leaving the horse and coming to lean on the fence beside her. What did Harper say? Clara took a deep breath. The restitution is substantial, more than I expected, enough to start fresh somewhere if I wanted to. Something flickered in Beau's eyes, concern, perhaps, or disappointment, but his voice remained steady. That's wonderful news, Clara. You deserve every penny and more. Yes, but… Clara hesitated, unsure how to express her conflicted feelings. I don't know what to do with it, what decision to make. Beau was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. What do you want, Clara? Not what you think you should want or what others might expect. What would make you happy? It was such a direct question, cutting through all her circular thinking to the heart of the matter. What did she want? The answer came to her with surprising clarity. I want to stay, she said softly, here at the ranch with you. Beau's head turned sharply, his blue eyes intense as they met hers. As the housekeeper, Clara felt a flush rising to her cheeks at his directness, but she matched it with her own. No, not just as the housekeeper. For a long moment they stood there, the confession hanging in the air between them. Then Beau reached across the fence, his calloused hand gently taking hers. I've been afraid to speak, he admitted, his voice low and earnest. Afraid you'd think I was taking advantage of your situation. That your gratitude might lead you to feelings you didn't truly have. It wasn't gratitude that made me fall in love with you, Clara said, the words emerging with surprising ease now that the barrier of silence had been broken. It was watching you every day, your kindness, your integrity, the way you treat everyone with respect regardless of their station. It was seeing the home we've built together and realizing I never want to leave it. Or you, Beau's grip on her hand tightened. I've loved you since that first night when you stood up to that cowboy with such quiet dignity despite everything, but I needed to be sure you could stand on your own, that you had real choices. He nodded toward town, indicating the restitution. Now you do. And I choose you, Clara said simply, if you'll have me. Beau's answering smile was like sunrise breaking across his serious face. He released her hand only to climb over the fence in one fluid movement, then drew her into his arms. I'd be honored to have you, Clara Blackburn, he murmured before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened with all the emotion they had kept contained for so long. When they finally parted, both breathless, Beau rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this properly. Will you marry me, Clara? Not as a man who rescued you, but as one who respects and loves you, who wants to build a life and a home with you as equal partners. Tears of joy welled in Clara's eyes. Yes, she whispered. With all my heart, yes. They were married on a perfect October day, with the mountains in the distance wearing their first dusting of snow. The ceremony took place at the ranch, with Reverend Thompson from Porterville officiating. Mrs. Reynolds had organized a reception that brought together most of the town's residents, all eager to celebrate the union of two people who had earned their respect and affection. Clara wore a gown of ivory silk that she had made herself on the sewing machine Beau had given her, with Mrs. Jensen and Mrs. Abernathy helping with the intricate lacework. Beau, for his part, looked transformed in a new black suit, his usually windswept hair neatly combed, his face cleanly shaven to reveal the strong jawline that Clara loved. As they exchanged vows beneath an arch of autumn flowers, Clara could scarcely believe how far she had come from that night at the Silver Dollar. From scrubbing floors on her knees to standing tall beside the man she loved, promising to share his life and his name. The celebrations continued into the evening, with dancing in the barn to the music of fiddles and an accordion. Clara danced with her new husband, their movements in perfect harmony, their eyes rarely leaving each other's faces. "Happy, Mrs. Sutton," Beau murmured as they swayed to a slow melody. "Completely," Clara answered, resting her head against his shoulder. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "I meant what I said that first night, you know. You'll never kneel for anyone again, not while I have breath in my body." Clara smiled up at him, her heart full. "I know, but I might kneel beside you sometimes to plant flowers in our garden, to pray in church, to tend to our children someday. Not in servitude, but in partnership, in love." Beau's arms tightened around her. "Our children," he repeated softly, a note of wonder in his voice. "I like the sound of that." As the music played on and the autumn night deepened around them, Clara knew that she had found not just security or respectability, but something far more precious, a love that had seen her true worth even when she was on her knees, a love that had raised her up and given her the most valuable gift of all, the dignity of choice and the joy of being truly seen and valued for herself. In the years that followed, the Sutton Ranch flourished under their joint care. The cattle herd grew and prospered, and Beau's breeding program gained recognition throughout the territory. Clara, meanwhile, established a small dressmaking business that operated from the ranch, with her reputation for fine work spreading far beyond Porterville. The house that had once been neglected became known as one of the most welcoming homes in the county, often filled with visitors, neighbors, and friends. And in time, the patter of small feet joined the household sounds, first a son, Henry, named for Clara's father, and then twin daughters, Elizabeth and Sarah, who inherited their mother's auburn hair and their father's bright blue eyes. On summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were tucked into bed, Beau and Clara would often sit together on the porch swing, watching the sun set over land that was truly their own. Sometimes they would speak of the journey that had brought them together, of a saloon floor, and a promise made by a stranger with kind eyes. But more often, they would simply sit in comfortable silence, hand in hand, grateful for the present and looking forward to the future they continued to build together. Clara never forgot those days of kneeling and scrubbing, of hunger and desperation. They had shaped her, taught her resilience and appreciation for the good fortune that had come her way. But when she looked back on that time from the security of her happy marriage and thriving home, she was grateful not just for the rescue, but for the rescuer, the man who had seen her dignity, even when she was on her knees, the man who had given her the chance to rise and stand beside him as an equal. In the end, Clara reflected, that was the greatest gift Beau had given her, not financial security or social respectability, but the recognition of her inherent worth as a human being. And in return, she had given him the home and family he had longed for, the roots he had sought after years of drifting. From such unlikely beginnings, a saloon floor and a chance encounter, they had built something beautiful and enduring, a life of mutual respect, shared purpose, and deep, abiding love. It was more than either of them had dared to hope for in those early days, and they cherished it all the more for knowing how easily it might never have been.